Got it. Okay.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. I'll be right back.
All right. So once again, I'm dropping that toolkit into the chat stream. So if you need to download that, it's available. But good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. I'm Jeremy Meyer. I'm a member of the Leverage Talent Enrichment team. I may be a new face to some of you folks, or one that maybe you've seen, but haven't had me in front presenting to you before. So just to give you a bit more about me and my connection to this opportunity and being a part of the Leverage Talent Enrichment team. Ultimately, my role here is to be the Director of Communications. And that means in terms of everything that our team is doing as talent enrichment, we're focused on creating a thriving workplace culture that's fostered in engagement. So as such, all of our roles and responsibilities within the team are focused on that key outcome. And so for communications, and my responsibility within communications is to support the commitment and aligned action of our team members according to the mission, values, strategies, and goals. So when you take those four components, the mission, values, strategies, and goals, it's to ensure that there's communication that's supporting that commitment and aligned action, that we're telling stories of what commitment and aligned action looks like and the types of results that it's creating for our organization, and how to provide recognition, how to ensure that there's clarity of expectations, and all of those elements of communication that can feel very broad. But supporting our teams as we are, as we're working to both lead to engagement as managers, and then for every individual in the organization to pursue engagement, because at ClickStop it is the expectation that all employees are going to be pursuing engagement. And so my role is wrapped up in that as Director of Communications. A little bit about Leverage Talent Enrichment, if folks aren't familiar with it, or just to refamiliarize yourself with it, as we as an organization have been focused on continuing to achieve the right results for our organization and do it in a sustainable way. We recognize that at the core of it, our pursuit and how we've attained that and how we've been able to sustainably continue to achieve that has been a question of many organizations. And organizations are wondering, how do you do it? And how do we begin to do it in our own organization? And as such, we've created this opportunity through Leverage where we can partner with organizations. We can continue to support those organizations, as they're seeking the right results for their organization and doing it in a sustainable way. We take the same approach to create a thriving workplace culture that's fostered in engagement. And we provide tools and resources and support to integrate that way of thinking and those habits, and support the organization as they're working to that end. So these workshops and things of the like are a part of those tools and resources that we create. These workshops, in terms of how they come to be, are first and foremost focused on supporting our internal team members in terms of, as we continue to work with our teams, we identify trends, we look for opportunities that we have to continue to support our team as we're working towards creating that thriving workplace culture. But additionally, we provide the opportunity for other organizations to take part in this. And so that's how this comes to be, where we have a mix of our internal folks with some of our external guests. So if you are an external guest with us this morning, welcome. We're glad to have you here. If it's your first time, awesome. Good to have you. We look forward to getting the chance to continue to work and to build that relationship. And if this is multiple times or many times that you've been a part of it, welcome back again. But we're glad to have everybody a part of this. Ultimately, what we're collectively seeking to do again is focus on engagement and what are the tools and resources we can do to support the engagement of our teams. I've told you a little bit about my role, but I haven't told you about my most important work that I have, which is my family. So if you can see that on the screen there, that's my wife, Kimberly. We've been married for 11 years. She is a huge part of my growth and maturity as a man over the course of those 11 years. I found out many things that I can continue to do to grow and improve, and she's been a great encouragement and support along the way. Additionally, we have our 7 kiddos that range in age from 11 down to 3. So we are busy, and yes, we are busy. She is extremely busy now that I'm working from home primarily, even though I'm on campus today. I get to experience a whole new dynamic to what it is to raise kids throughout the day. I hear much of what's going on, and occasionally we'll step into that as well. But she's a huge blessing. Kids are a blessing. It is definitely the most important work that that I have to do. So I wanted to give you a little bit of awareness into that part of me. Today, what we're seeking to accomplish, our focus, again, right, everything that we're doing is working to support our teams and to support your teams in creating thriving workplace culture that's fostered engagement. So today we're talking about prioritization, and we'll link that to engagement as we go throughout. But in terms of the outcomes or the goals that we have for it, we're going to identify the most important information that will support efficient prioritization and execution of that work. We're going to engage in quality collaboration to prioritize the work of your team. So how do we use that information to engage in quality collaboration to prioritize the work? And then ultimately finding greater meaning in our work. Because we'll see as we go through this that connecting and prioritizing becomes something that we own, and we're owning it towards something that we know is ultimately important and going to create great impact for the organization, which ties into meaningful work. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few of some of the ground rules and housekeeping items. So you're familiar, we're working virtually. When we do these on campus, we're highly interactive. You like to turn and get to know those that we're in the workshop with. It's not just me standing up here presenting information out to you. At the end of the day, this is a way for us to engage in the thoughts and the processes and the philosophy, but to begin to engage in dialogue around how this shows up in our work, and to ask questions and to begin to wrestle with that amongst the group. And so as we're doing that, we'll utilize some of the virtual capability that we have with Zoom, where we'll do breakouts, and so be asking you to break out with some other team members, and in certain cases you'll be getting a chance to work with those who maybe you've never or get to know someone that you've never had the chance to talk to. I know we have I see Amanda and some of our Bazooka team members out there may have a chance to engage in some of that dialogue themselves in their own space, but we'll utilize what we can from the virtual space to do some of those breakouts. And as we're engaging in the dialogue, understand that we're at different points in our journey, right? So along the spectrum of understanding and awareness, we're at different points. And so as we engage in dialogue, be mindful of that and be respectful of wherever the individual may be at in their journey or awareness of something. And as we're presenting our thoughts and opinions, we'll maintain openness, honesty, and respect as we're doing so. I see that everybody's microphones are muted, which is great. I'll ask you to keep the microphones muted unless you're speaking. However, if you do have a question, feel free to use that virtual hand raise that you have there as an option on your screen. Or you can additionally put into the chat feature if you have a question. I'll be monitoring that as well, so I can see when you have your hand up. I can see when you may have a question in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. We do have one break scheduled for right around 10. If you need to attend to anything in the meantime, feel free to do so. Just be mindful that if your camera's on, we can see what's going on. And lastly, the toolkit, which I've mentioned a few times, make sure that you have that present. If you download it to your device, it's interactive. If you just open it up in a browser without downloading it, it likely won't be interactive for you, but you can either print that off, or if you download it to your device, it is interactive. So make sure that you all have one of those. All right, let's get started. I'm going to get into prioritization. All right, so prioritization. There are many variables that affect prioritization, or when we say prioritization, it's the action or process of deciding the relative importance or urgency of a thing or things. And what often makes prioritization so difficult is there are variables that we can't anticipate, or things that arise which affect our prioritization on a matter. So what we are seeking to accomplish is to develop a framework of thinking that regularly draws in the most important things that our organization is seeking to accomplish. And as that boils down into every layer into our role, our focus is on aligning our action with the things that are most important. And to do this in a way that is agile enough and responsive enough to how those variables change. I've heard Tim Gunther is our CEO of ClickStop. And he said many times do what's right. Just do what's right. So there's this feeling, this gut feeling, and I've struggled with that at times because I understand that as individuals are seeking to do what's right, it may not in the end result in what's most impactful for the organization. So I've struggled with that, but as I've continued to think on it, I believe that in what he is ultimately getting after, we have a way in which we can approach that where the individual themselves in whatever role can autonomously and creatively approach their work in terms of identifying priorities to do what's right, but to do it in a way that has curbs or parameters that are going to ensure that we're not getting outside of doing what's right in ways that aren't going to be most impactful for the organization. And again, ultimately, when we talk about the prioritization of our work, if you turn to page 3 with me in your toolkit, you're going to see this that's on the screen, drivers of engagement. Everything that we're doing, again, as a team and what tools and resources we're presenting is focused on this. It's engagement. And so when you look at these drivers of engagement, consider these drivers of engagement as the criteria that every employee is using to assess the quality of relationship they have with their organization. This information comes from thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of research and studies, and the data is out there. And so this particular list comes to us from Pecan, which I've added some additional definition to it. But these are the drivers that we are focused on. So as an individual, every relationship that we have assessing, we have some criteria that we're using to assess the quality of that relationship. And every employee, as these studies have been conducted, they're boiled down into these common categories. These are the categories that employees are using to assess the quality of their relationship. And when we talk about engagement, which is commitment and aligned action to the mission, values, strategies, and the goals, when these are going well, when it is felt that these are going well, it is likely that engagement will ensue. So these are most likely to cause a person to commit and give discretionary effort in the workplace. And discretionary effort is it's the key differentiator between engagement and satisfaction. Knowing that we have this discretionary effort that we can pull into our work to ensure that the organization grows and succeeds. So when we consider prioritization and we look then at these drivers, we can see that there are a remarkable amount of drivers that are affected by prioritization. You think about accomplishment in terms of feeling like at the end of the day you've accomplished work that's meaningful to the organization. Autonomy, feeling like I have the freedom to be able to decide how I'm going about my work. When you look at goal setting or freedom of opinion or growth, management support, meaningful work, organizational fit, peer relationships, strategy, workload. So as we come together and we're talking about prioritization, and ultimately at the core of what we're seeking to do is to create this thriving workplace culture that's fostered in engagement, understand that addressing prioritization in the framework of thinking in which we're going to begin to work within is intended to produce higher levels of engagement, to make it easier and to support our team members as we are collectively committing and aligning our action or pursuing engagement. So and I'll mention too, when it comes to building this framework of thinking, this isn't a tool that is going to anticipate every future need that we have. It's a tool, it's a framework of thinking to be able to efficiently and effectively engage in dialogue that brings in the most important elements, the things that we're to be targeting and working on to ensure that we're prioritizing our work well. So it's something that will be repeated often, not just an exercise you go through once and then everything's determined after that. But it's a way to engage in this type of dialogue often and ensure that we're prioritizing well. All right. Now's one of those chances you get to work with some of the other folks that are in the room. So I'm gonna assign some breakout rooms here. Now I understand, I'll do my best to get these broken up in a way that allows for some of our teams I know that are in shared spaces to ensure that we're getting out all right. So we're gonna have Likely you're going to be paired up with one other. I'm creating the rooms now. So you may, in certain instances, have multiple in the room. But what I'm going to ask you to do is this. I'm going to ask you to focus on what's on page 4. If you go to page 4 with me, there's this scenario. A scenario where your boss says, today you're hitting the road, and she proceeds to hand you a list of 12 locations you need to visit. What information do you need to obtain in order to successfully complete what matters most? So what information do you need to obtain in order to successfully complete what matters most? So I'm going to ask you to think about that. And additionally, take a moment to get to know the person that's in the room with you. So you may know or you may not know the individual that you'll be in the room with. Take a moment to introduce yourself, the organization you're with, the role and responsibilities that you have, and what you're hoping to accomplish from this workshop. So I'm going to assign these, and then when I click open, you'll have an opportunity to enter into that room. And give me one moment here. I'm going to, all right, rooms are opening. Should all have a chance to join them now. Hi, Julia. Can you hear me, Julia?
I can. I'm sorry. I had some technical difficulties and my computer shut down.
Oh, no good. I'm gonna put you into a room. You just kind of jump in where they're at, but I'll move you into the room so you get a chance to at least connect with a couple people. Sound good?
Yeah, great.
Rooms are closing shortly. So everyone will come back here in a moment. And there comes back all the faces. All right.
I can only see 4 faces. Is that normal?
I think we all have the video.
So if you hover over your screen where the cameras are, you should see
Yeah.
multiple views on there. It might have like 4 boxes, and then there's one that has 9 boxes. Looks kind of like the Brady Bunch. Should be on the left.
Yeah, it says the grid video.
Yep, click that.
And if you stretch it out, it'll pull more into it, I believe.
That is why. I gotcha.
There we go.
Ooh, there we go. Sorry, new to this.
Hey, don't worry. We're all figuring it out, right? All right. So you all just went into the group, you introduced yourselves a little bit, and you thought about this scenario. So what type of information were you seeking in order to successfully accomplish this work? What were some of those pieces of information that you were seeking?
What is the overall objective
Yeah.
of going out and visiting customers or prospects?
Yes, that's great. In the end, what do we hope to accomplish? Love that.
Is there a timeline?
Timeline, yeah. Awesome. What else?
Is there a general priority of what is most important?
Yeah, so ultimately that's what we're seeking to accomplish, right? What is the most important amongst all of these? We have a list, what's most important. What else?
We kind of dove into the why behind it a little bit, and we're asking a lot of questions around, is this the best way to be doing this? Is this, why are we choosing to get on the road versus a phone call or a video call, and those kinds of questions.
I love that. You think about materials, resources, or other ways to approach this work, being curious about it, just considering what do we hope to accomplish and how does this help us accomplish it? That's great. So there's lots of pieces of information, right, that we're looking to pull in, and all of this information is being used to prioritize our work. And it's likely that on any given day, the volume of work that we have to do, or the types of things, the options we have of what we could be focused on, is going to exceed the individual capacity that we have. Or there are going to be things that arise within a day that are going to ultimately, they're going to compete for the capacity that we have, because every one of us has a limited capacity. So when we talk about prioritizing our work, it's taking all of that information and it's boiling it down to how do we ensure that we're working on the most important things, that we're getting to the most important things. And asking those types of questions is important. And you begin to think about, as we're approaching our work, being curious and asking those questions is going to help us better understand what it is that we're seeking to accomplish, the outcomes, the overall objectives, the timeline of things, rather than just taking information from one direction and expecting that that's going to provide for us everything that we need, or being curious about it. Which brings us to the next point of reflection, which I'm going to send you back into your groups, and you'll have 5 minutes to talk about this, but still on page 4, you have some additional questions to reflect on. And it's reflecting on that most employees are waiting to hear from their manager how to prioritize their workload. Most employees wait to hear from their manager on how to prioritize their workload. So as you reflect on this, there's some questions to guide your discussion, and there's some questions for you to consider on page 4 that you can jot down there. But I'm going to ask you to share your reflections in your group again. So what experiences do you have at this, and what were the reasons why that dynamic existed? What contributed to that? What emotions were present? What did it feel like to be in that sort of dynamic? And what effect does this have on the sustainability of the organization? Some of the questions you can use to facilitate that dialogue. And you can take notes on page 4 where it's asking broadly what contributes to the behavior and what effect does that have on the sustainability of the organization. I'm going to send you back out into your groups. You'll have about 5 minutes to discuss those things. And we're focused on, most employees wait to hear from their manager on how to prioritize the workload. What contributes to this? All right, send you back out into your groups. right now. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, as you discuss this, just looking for some folks to share, what are some of the contributing factors to this type of relationship? The employee waits to hear from the manager.
Many people aren't comfortable with taking that lead role and suggesting how they would approach this initiative.
Yeah, Doug. So sometimes it sounds like there's maybe a level of courage or fear, maybe the repercussions of what if I fail, if I suggest something that's not right. Absolutely, see that.
Yeah, also it may have to do with the manager may have all the information, but doesn't really explain the why or the purpose behind it. So there may
Yeah.
not be any delegation, or just the employee probably just not asking enough questions to get to the bottom of it.
Christine, that's great. So connecting ultimately what it is that we're seeking to accomplish, understanding bigger picture, what are we hoping to achieve? Instead of getting to that layer, you're at the layer of do this with a task that's maybe disconnected from the outcomes. What else?
Our group talked a little bit about just needing that approval, feeling like you need that validation from your leader. If they're involved in that process with you, kind of to your point about being afraid to fail, but still needing that validation to make sure you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. So what does validation look like, or how do you approach a conversation to find that validation?
In my experience, it's been more asking a lot of leading questions, making sure. So I'm thinking about it this way: is this kind of what you were thinking about, or how you were thinking about it, to make sure that you tend to be on the same page? And if you get feedback from a leader that's like, well, actually, I was more leaning this way. So it's just asking those leading questions to see how they're thinking about the same concept.
Yeah, and the frequency of that dialogue, Megan. So the frequency of the dialogue may be determined by how often you find that you're misaligned within that conversation, or you find you're aligned. Absolutely. What else? What else might contribute to that? And what does it feel like? How does it affect results?
Maybe you don't want to sound dumb by asking questions that you think are just a silly question. But not asking those questions, you can miss out on ideas. You can miss out on collaboration opportunities. Maybe you have a different perspective of how the work could be done. And
yeah, I've been there, right? And I raise your hand, right? If you felt like I don't want to sound dumb, I'm hesitant to ask this question. Like, I'm supposed to know this information, I think. Yeah, I think we've probably collectively all experienced that. So when we reflect on this, there could be a lot of contributing factors. We talked, courage. There's a measure of security that we have in maybe having our manager tell us what it is that we should be prioritizing amongst our work, because it's clearly stated to us what we should be working on. Therefore, I just kind of go after that, right? And so if I present back the work once it's completed, I feel good about having executed on what I was told I need to be executing on. When we look at engagement, we understand that there's a point of, or there's a return on that type of investment as well. Because if a task is disconnected from a bigger picture or the larger context of why we're doing what we're doing, it feels less meaningful. It feels great to accomplish what ultimately a manager may be expecting of us or stating of us explicitly. But in terms of measuring that impact, it's hard for us to assess the impact on the organizational level. And what we're seeking to do in effective prioritization is to ensure that every individual doesn't have to necessarily just go to a manager to ask the manager what work is going to be most impactful to the organization, but to make that connection for themselves through attaining certain information. And additionally, if we as a manager, if you have team members that report to you, and you're providing them information specific to what you believe they need to accomplish in order to achieve the outcomes, and you're not tying it into the bigger picture, right? Or you're not allowing for the feedback to go in. You're taking one perspective and one approach on what's most important. And we know that in every layer of the organization, individuals have perspective, awareness, strengths that are going to help refine decision making. And they will, through that collaborative effort, identify the right strategies to achieve the right outcomes. An example that I've been told before is, if we're focused on just giving specific direction without tying it to the overall outcomes and allowing for some of that creative autonomy to happen, it's as though going into the tailor and telling them what to do, specific to, if I'd say, this is what I want you to do, that tailor would have done exactly what I had requested. But then if the jacket didn't fit properly, he would have said, I did what you told me to do. On the other hand, if I told him what we are trying to achieve, for the jacket to lay flat with no pulling in the back, shoulder, or sleeve, he could be responsible for the outcome I described. So to present outcomes versus just specific tasks or responsibility to an individual, where you can then begin to talk about ways that it can be approached, it allows for that dialogue to take place where the perspective that individual can enter into it. Now, we can engage in that conversation often. And we in the last workshop, John touched on delegation, which is talking through the formula, the clarity of the vision, and allowing for the clarity of the vision and the clear and high expectations to take place and to be created amongst the dialogue that is essentially passing into autonomy. So as manager and employee are talking about what we're seeking to achieve and the importance of the matter and the expectations that are rooted in it, there's questions. Additionally, if as an organization, our employees are able to effectively engage in that dialogue without always having to go back and forth with the manager, though there's certainly a place for that, but not having to go to the manager to ask for verification every time that a prioritization is occurring, or a shift in priorities may be occurring, or asking for that shift. If an individual themselves can identify it, it's much more effective in achieving the results in an efficient way for the individual to grow within that, and for the results of the organization to be much more sustainable. So understanding this bigger picture of things is where we need to begin the conversation as we continue to boil this down, to ensure that we're not waiting for the manager to tell us what to work. And as a manager, we're not going through that process of expecting to tell our teams what they need to be working on and why at all times. So go to the next page in your packet on page 5. Some of you have seen this before, and we'll talk a bit about that, but I'm going to give you 3 minutes here to go through and answer these questions that you see at the top of page 5. Answering the question, what is the mission of your organization? What is the purpose of your team? What is the purpose of your role? And establishing why ultimately you matter to the organization. So take 3 minutes to answer those first 3 questions. What is the mission of your organization? What is the purpose of your team? And what is the purpose of your role? All right, give you 30 seconds to wrap that up. All right. So I need a volunteer. Share with me the purpose of their role, and they're going to engage in a game we play called So That. Plenty of you are already familiar with this. Some of you have taken part in it before. If you have taken part in it, feel free to step back from the opportunity. However, I'm looking for one participant to share with me the purpose of your role, and we'll engage in some dialogue around that. I'd like to share the purpose of their role. I know not everyone in here has played the game. I do have names in front of me I can call too.
I'll help you out.
All right, Doug. Doug, have you played the So That game before?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, Doug, tell us the purpose of your role.
So we're not going mission, purpose of my team, purpose of my role. We're starting right away with my role.
Yep.
Okay. My role is to balance the load of my staff, ensure that we've got process coherence, guiding the team on best supporting the company by not only doing the work that they were hired to do, but also asking the right questions, so that in the end we've got more individuals contributing to the creativity of the solution.
So Doug, you went through a line of thinking there, and you kind of continued to build on the importance of the matter. And the last statement you made of having individuals who are engaging in, you said around the mission, right? And you framed that up in a particular way. That is important, so that what?
So that in the end, my team and our company are producing the best product that serves our clients.
And that's important, so that what?
Those clients can then are most enabled to be the best that they can be for their customers.
Which is important, so that what?
So it might be a little easier if I get into a little more detail. We produce software for higher ed, so any of those administrators, faculty then can produce results that enable students to more easily register for a class, find classes that are most suited to their liking, the best way to schedule those classes, the best way to think through their degree and in what order to take the classes.
Love that. And that's important, so that what?
So that those students can get the best education possible in the most efficient way, so that they can graduate and become productive human beings.
That's great, Doug. Thanks for sharing that line. I think good job. Good job, Doug. So as we continue to dig deeper into what the purpose of your role is, Doug, you went through kind of the purpose of your role and began to connect it with the larger picture of the organization right off the bat. And not every individual does that right off the bat, where they begin to see this line of thinking and diving in and utilizing that tool as a way to take what the individual sees as the purpose of their role and connect it to the bigger picture, connect it to the team, then connect it to the mission of the organization, which then serves a purpose of fulfilling or accomplishing other things. Helping to see that line of thinking is important. And I know some of you in here have taken part in it and you've seen this multiple times. So I want to take a moment to ask what makes this exercise important, and what makes this exercise important to engagement? Understanding that's the core of what we're doing. What makes it important? Why does it matter?
I think it helps you step back and really reflect on what your priorities are and should be. It's so easy to kind of get caught up in the day-to-day work that it goes on a list and maybe stays on a list for a while. So doing this kind of helps you reprioritize and refocus your role.
Yeah. What impact does that have? Does that information have on establishing your priorities?
And make sure that you're aligned with what your company, what your team, and what your role are.
Yeah. And in order to create what impact? What type of impact is created in that?
It's just a positive impact for your business and then the clients of your business.
Yeah, so the most important impact. Thanks, Jake, for saying that. So this is an exercise that's shown up in multiple of our workshops, and it's not just because it's a fun game that we like to play that make people continue to think on, well, so that what, right? Ultimately, when we look at engagement, the number one influencer of engagement is clear and high expectations. And if we look at following that line of thinking, it's getting into the bigger picture of vision and purpose, right? Ultimately, what difference do I make to the organization? Why do I matter? And clear and high expectations in terms of how they're created require an anchoring within the larger context, the bigger picture, the vision of things. So in terms of prioritization, if we're going to be great at prioritizing, we need to understand how our role is serving the bigger picture. Why do we matter to the organization? Because that is going to help us refine. That's going to be some anchoring along the way that's going to be consistent as I'm determining what the most important work is that I can do for the organization. So think of what is static, more static in terms of, you know, a job description, right? If I'm given my job description, I can look at my job description right now and I see like big pictures, there's maybe some things that are more consistent that I'm going to repeat. And I know we have some teams that come from, you know, a manufacturing background or production background and things where maybe there's a lot of steps that are repeated often. However, there's always going to be some added steps or opportunities or options for us to pursue that aren't specifically stated in a job description. And as we narrow that down, what impacts that is some of this duration of time. So when I'm handed a job description, it's just kind of, it's just an ongoing, these are general expectations. But what I need to know is not just general expectations. I also need to know what is my organization seeking to accomplish within a more tangible duration of time. So I have this mission, this bigger picture that remains consistent. But what we need to do is boil that down into something where I can see, all right, in order to achieve the mission, we're seeking to accomplish this within the next 12 months. And as I begin to understand what our organization is seeking to accomplish within the next 12 months, I'm beginning to understand more about what it is that as an organization, how we're going to be successful. So it's taking something, it's making more tangible. And then we break that down into something that feels even more tangible, which is 90 days. So I can influence those things. So just as we go through this, you know, the so that game and the prioritization of our work, it's important that we are boiling this down and we're getting the information, not just on job description level, what we're seeking to accomplish, or just the mission statement level, though that's the anchoring that all this is in. It's really, what are we as an organization seeking to accomplish in the next 12 months? And how is our team seeking to support that within the next 90 days? Those are the things that are going to be important. So you have a few minutes here before we break that I'm going to ask you to write those things down. I ask you to spend 3 minutes on the rest of page 5. What are the top 3 to 5 objectives your organization is seeking to achieve in the next 12 months? And then what goals is your team seeking to accomplish in the next 90 days to help your company achieve their objectives? Take about 3 minutes to reflect on those and jot down what those are. Take another minute here. All right. So just ask for a few volunteers. What's one thing that your organization is seeking to achieve in the next 12 months? And then how is your team, what is a goal that your team is focused on achieving to support that initiative of your organization? Something that your organization is focused on achieving in the next 12 months. Looking for a volunteer here.
I know one of the big goals with True North this year is to really focus on continuing improving processes and working on efficiencies to be more effective in our day-to-day. So as working with the human resource team, things that we're really focusing on within the next 90 days is how can we be more efficient and more effective with the leaders' time when it comes to openings that they have and the communication process that we have to keep them up to date on where we're at with those positions. So we've started to develop kind of a timeline of what needs to happen and surveying our leaders on how they feel we can most effectively utilize their time as we build out these new processes to understand what enhancements or changes we need to make.
Awesome. And how is this ultimately going to impact the organization in fulfilling this work?
What we're looking at is more timely fill rate. With the market the way it is, we're looking at 60 to 70 days sometimes to fill a position. So being able to effectively communicate and understand what the leader's expectations are and having them understand what ours are from a timeline from the start of the process to when they interview candidates, when we get offers and updates to our candidates will ultimately help us continue to bring top talent in quicker.
Love that. And Megan, all the information you just presented, I'm sure there's parts of that in the job description, but is all of that a part of your job description? All of those statements and goals?
Not necessarily, but there's bits and pieces of it that, to continue to effectively operate and run my team within talent acquisition. So I feel like that is a gray area that falls within that bucket.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for sharing all that, Megan.
You're welcome.
One other person? We got a break. We'll make sure we get in there.
Jeremy, I can go. The next 12 months, some of our brands are transitioning to a new back-end website. So that's hopefully will be done within the next 12 months. And then on my team, there'll be support from specifically within my role, email marketing will also transition to something that plugs in better to the back end. Yeah.
So in terms of the impact that has on the organization, what type of impact will it create?
Major efficiencies. It will reduce the amount that we have to rely on the IT team in order to launch new types of programs like a loyalty program or a rewards program or something like that. And it will allow us to kind of retain that within the marketing team.
Awesome. And Marissa, within your job description, there's likely bits and pieces of that, but is all of the information you just shared specific to the job description?
It's been a while since I've looked at my job description, but I would say that continuing to keep efficiencies within the email marketing program, supporting the web team, things like that are definitely part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. So I want to make sure that we get this break in on time, but I just want to highlight a couple things, right? So we've talked about purpose. Your role matters to the organization. The organization has created an opportunity or has presented an opportunity to you because there's value in it. It's helping the organization achieve its mission. And you're a part of a team that is also helping the organization achieve its mission. There's certain focus that the team is on. And then additionally, you have specific expectations within your role. And as you're continuing with it, it's becoming more narrowly focused. So both Megan and Marissa shared that there's aspects of what they're doing that are within their role. That's great. That shows that there's alignment in terms of an understanding of how this role is supporting the organization and helping clarify what those expectations look like within a set duration of time. It's essential that we as employees in the organization are thinking through that, not just on the big level, but narrowing it down, getting more clear. As an organization at ClickStop, we've created the ClickStop philosophy and strategy document that contains core initiatives, which are ongoing, things like great workplace culture, personal and professional development, achieving GPA and budget expenses, automation and efficiency. Those are things that are ongoing. And additionally, we have within 12 months, each of our brands have key areas of focus within 12 months. But that doesn't dictate all of the movements. Just like in your organizations, you define 12 months of what you're seeking to accomplish. It requires additional work to collaborate and develop the strategies to execute against. And that's rooted in your team's purpose to the organization. So you look at what the organization is seeking to achieve and how your team is impacting that. And then it gets down to the level of every individual in the organization has a role and responsibility, which is where we're going to get to next, because there are specifics that you are working on that flow through the big, what are we seeking to accomplish as an organization? What are we seeking to accomplish as a team? And now it's getting down to what are you seeking to accomplish to support what the goals are of your team within the next 90 days. That's where we're going to go next. But before, I want to make sure we get a break. So we're going to do a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 10:08. 10:08, we'll be back. All right, we're at 10:08. I still see some cameras off. If you are there, would you mind putting your camera on just so I know that you're back in your seat? Just don't want to leave too many out. A few, it looks like. Again, if you're at your seat, would you mind just turning your camera on so that I can confirm that you're there? All right. Still a few more that need to come back, but in the meantime, so you've heard in terms of this point in the conversation, we're focused a lot on what the organization is seeking to accomplish. And we understand that in prioritization, there's a lot of things that are variables that we consider when prioritizing our work. And we're about to get down to where rubber meets the road. But as in the conversations and the reflecting that you've had to this point, how is this resonating with you in terms of what you know of or how you're thinking about prioritizing your work? Or are there any new insights that are emerging to this point you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, Jeremy, I think it's just constantly reevaluating your priorities. Kind of following up what I said last time of it's so easy to add it to your list and then keep on moving through it, but taking that time to step back and say, you know, what's most important now, what's most impactful now, I think is a huge help.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Jake.
Yeah, I'm right with him on that. I think the biggest problem some can run into is getting caught in the minutiae of the day, or just their general day-to-day workload, and taking a step back is absolutely essential.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Nathan. Anyone else? Thought, insight that's emerging, or seeing how this aligns with the way that you're prioritizing your work? All right. Well, Nathan, what you said about getting caught up in the minutia of the day, that is absolutely, that's something that we all run into. And so this next step, when we get to page 6 here, if you open up with me to page 6 in the toolkit, so we're going to begin to work through those things. What you see in front of you, you have a list, top 8 items you're focused on accomplishing in your role, and keep this duration to the next 90 days. What are the top 8 items you're focused on accomplishing? So thinking about what your organization is seeking to accomplish and what your team is seeking to do to support that. What are you specifically doing that is supporting the work of your team, which then when you look at the line of impact is how you're impacting the organization. So it may be that there are more than 8, it may be that there are less than 8. So fill in what is appropriate with a max of 8, but take a few minutes here to fill in the top 8 items, or up to the top 8 items that you're focused on accomplishing in your role. And then I'm going to ask you also, you see importance and urgency on a scale of 1 to 4 that's next to it, 1 being the lowest amount, 4 being the highest amount. So in terms of importance, how would you rate that level of importance? So in terms of impact on the organization, and then urgency, timeline to complete. Sometimes that urgency is impacted by other feelings of capacity and such. So rate it as appropriate as you can. Importance, impact on organization, and urgency, timeline to complete. Scale of 1 to 4, 1 being the least and 4 being the greatest. And we're on page 6 here in the toolkit. Couple more minutes here to finish that up. All right. So having listed those out, whatever number you arrived at, maximum of 8, if you go to page 7, you're going to use the ratings on each of those items. So where you rated it on level of importance, you'll see on the top of page 7, there's 2 charts, and on the y-axis you got importance, and on the x-axis you got urgency. And so you're going to chart the number of that item, chart it accordingly with where it falls on the chart in terms of the combination of importance and urgency. Take a moment to do that, and if that's not clear, please let me know. I can clarify. And just use the chart on your, or one of the charts for now, one on the left, if you haven't already started marking on the one on the right. Give you about 30 seconds to complete that. So you've charted those. Now we're gonna focus on the upper right-hand quadrant. And I know some of these charts and things that are not necessarily unfamiliar in the way to chart out things, but I want to challenge the way that we approach this work. For those of you from the manufacturing or supply chain management background, you're familiar with WIP, or work in progress. And so understanding that there are going to be constraints or areas where we're seeking to move product through that it may collect in larger volumes, where there's a larger volume of work in progress that can be the result of a variety of things. And reducing that is important for the organization in terms of reducing cost and increasing profit, right? So as individuals, no matter where we're at in the organization, there's WIP that can be created because there are other things that get inserted into the highest priority items and the most urgent items. So at times we can feel that a particular item is highly important but not urgent, or we can feel that it's very urgent and yet it's not important. The thing that we want to make sure does not get kept as WIP are the items that are the most impactful for the organization. These are the items that we're seeking to move through and to be executing on at a high level, to be efficient in this way. And so as you listed out what you have in terms of highest importance and highest urgency, those items that are in the upper right-hand quadrant is where we want to be focusing 80% of our time. So as you look at your chart and you consider, I'm spending 80% of my time, or my goal is to spend 80% of my time on the upper right-hand quadrant, I want you to take a moment to reflect on that. And then I'm going to have you go into your breakout rooms as well. And on the bottom of page 6, there's some questions to facilitate the dialogue. But begin to think about how you are identifying what's important, what's urgent. Think about what's going to be impacted as a result of that work. When you look at the top 80%, are there things that feel out of place? Are there things that you feel need to change? But those are questions that you're going to be reflecting on and asking one another. So I'm going to give you about 8 minutes to engage in that dialogue within your breakout room. Is there any clarity I need to bring on that before I kick you out to the rooms? All right, I'll open up the rooms now.
You say that was an urgency of 4 and importance of 4, Mac?
Yeah, just because it's kind of the foundation of getting to work. You know, if I don't go through the Quick Start program, it's, you know, it can start off rocky for me, and if, you know, it starts off rocky for me, it can start that way for, you know, future employees as well.
Are you able to spend 80% of your time on it?
I'm spending pretty much 95% of my time on it right now. Yeah.
That's good.
I have Bazooka team. How are things going over there today? Do you have control of the microphone?
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you today?
We're good. We have a room full here, and plus Brian, he doesn't have a microphone, but he's at his desk.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, he hasn't been involved in our conversation. I totally forgot about him.
How many folks do you have in the room then?
It's myself, Eric Harvey, and then we got Carlos and Amy.
Very good.
We were supposed to have we have Spark Impact going in the main conference room and then engineering conference room. I had reserved, but then got kicked out. So we had to find alternative locations.
All these needs to meet virtually create additional space needs. That's wild.
Yep.
Cool. Well, welcome back, everybody. So you've had a chance to discuss this within your groups, this approaching that upper right quadrant, 80% of our time. And I'm curious, as you've reflected on that, engaged in conversation, how has it affected the way you think about priorities or what your priorities are?
I think for me, especially using that kind of ranking them by urgency and importance, it kind of helps me understand what I might be spending too much time on and what I'm not spending enough time on to kind of help reach those primary goals.
What's indicating to you that you may be spending too much time on something?
Well, as I rank them by importance and urgency and evaluate kind of the percentage of my time spent on each of those, it's definitely the everything outside of the upper right quadrant definitely takes more than 20% of my effort.
What contributes to that?
Probably lack of prioritization and stepping back and looking at what's most important to the business and what can help down the road, as opposed to just kind of keeping up with the status quo. So more focused on just keeping up as opposed to moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Nathan.
Yeah, sure thing.
But anyone else?
So one thing I talked about is I noticed how some of my priorities might actually end up being more of an indirect priority. So for example, I need to focus on business development, but yet at the same time, I need to focus on, my team development at this time, and kind of coming into different transitions through COVID. I could have a priority on business development, which I'm doing side by side with my team, which then in turn is actually developing them personally. So maybe having a higher priority on the business development where indirectly it's going to fall into that other bucket too, instead of trying to separate them so much, try to combine and then have the sense of urgency be more on one versus the other.
Yeah, I love that. So in reflecting on what the priorities are and seeing it out in front of you, are you recognizing that the urgency and importance of one or the other was off?
Yeah, I think the urgency of staying in front of my teams or feeling like I needed to give them more personal development or one-on-one versus actually going after the business development. Yeah, I think my focus is now going to be shifted a different way just to have a different mindset behind it, which could warrant better results.
Yeah. What ways can that pursuit of business development and then what you're talking about with your team development, how can those two combine to create the results that you're seeking?
I think just in general, kind of like lead by example, mirroring and matching and helping them see, oh, here's some different strategies that could be used, as well as it could help develop me as a leader because I could learn from them as well, allowing them just to kind of be hands-on doing something versus, okay, here's a training about it. Now let's go do it. Well, let's just go do it together and work through, the pieces in tandem.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing, Julie.
Yeah.
Who else? Do you want went through that conversation? What were some things that stood out in terms of reflecting on this and looking at what you've deemed as important and urgent work in upper right-hand quadrant? What stood out to you in that?
I was in Julie's group, and I actually talked about the opposite experience that happened to me, where I was looking at what was in my upper right-hand quadrant and saying, this is most important and most urgent. And it caused some other tasks and responsibilities to be lifted into that quadrant because of the dependency on them in order for us to be successful in the first task or responsibility. So it kind of pulled all these other things up into that quadrant that was, I guess, unexpected as a result.
Yeah, that's great. So did those added things did they just get added, or did other things have to shift where some that were deemed upper right-hand quadrant moved out?
Yeah, I had to move some other things out, kind of like Nathan. I was looking and saying, how am I going to make all that happen in one work week, and had to put some other things at a lower urgency. Didn't necessarily change the level of importance, but it did make the urgency go down.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to ask everyone, so as you maybe like John just described, or as Julie described too, recognizing where some of these things lie, when you have that second chart on there, and you may be looking at this first chart and the way that you rated it and taking that approach of spending 80% of your time in the upper right-hand quadrant, you may recognize that there's some things that you want to move around. Maybe you've already done that mentally, but chart those things on the second chart. So if you start on the left side, go to the right side. If you start on the right side, go to the left side. But rechart your areas of focus or the key responsibilities, the things you're focused on accomplishing in your role within the next 90 days. And rechart them if necessary. I'll give you a moment to do that. Maybe that your chart hasn't changed. Maybe that it's completely changed, slight changes. And as you're doing that, as you're recharting it, then you have those 4 spaces that says, what are your top priorities? There's 4 spaces available. Again, you may have less, but write in the top priorities that you have into those spaces, as it's determined by the upper right-hand quadrant. What are those top priorities? Write those into that space. All right. So you've written in your top priorities. Maybe you've kind of gone through and reworked what's in that quadrant. Now reflect on this. What difference will this make for the organization? Additionally, what concerns do you have? And then as you reflect on that, what needs to happen to move things forward? What difference will this make for the organization? What concerns do you have? So maybe when you look at that, you're noting one or multiple that you have a concern with that maybe it's not going to be completed within that duration of time. So reflect on that. And then additionally, reflect on what needs to happen. What do you propose needs to happen to move that forward? Maybe it's the capacity, the materials, the resources. Maybe it's renegotiating some other commitments that have already been made. a few minutes to complete that. One minute longer to wrap that up. We'll talk about it a little bit. All right. So recall in the beginning when I was introducing prioritization, and I mentioned how Tim Gunther, our CEO, had mentioned just do what's right, and how that felt at times that it was difficult to grasp due to the feeling of the risk of subjectivity. Now, as we begin to think through this, when we say, and we're saying do what's right, we're putting some of the curbs on that, right? What's our organization seeking to accomplish? What's our team seeking to do to support what the organization's seeking to accomplish? And then additionally, what am I focused on accomplishing? When we begin to put all of that together, it starts to develop some convictions, right? So when we set those priorities in terms of importance and urgency, and we chart that out and we begin to objectively look at it, and then we determine our priorities from there, it's rooted in some conviction on what we believe is going to impact the organization and why we believe it's important. It may be that we feel that there's some concerns within it in terms of the way that I perceive how maybe others are going to view this, or maybe what isn't present to support it, or what I would need additionally to support it. But what is true in prioritization is that it doesn't happen solely in terms of knowing with 100% absolute certainty that this is going to be the thing that needs to be done for the organization. We are more than likely dealing with things that are most likely right or most likely wrong. And additionally, it's important that we are able to engage with both our manager, because there are times where we're going to have to clarify, which has already been brought up as an example. This is what I'm proposing is my priority based on this criteria, based on what I know the organization is seeking to accomplish and what our team is doing to support it. This is what I believe I should be focused on doing, and this is why. And additionally, within your team, you can engage in collaboration as you discuss it. So as you discuss as a team what you're focused on achieving, and then you look at your role and responsibilities and how you can impact that, you're proposing what are your top priorities and why. And it's a way to engage in effective dialogue that is focused on the most impactful work, but can be done in an objective way where you're asking clarifying questions, or likely where you need to find compromise, because as we mentioned, we're all limited in our capacity. Our team is limited in its capacity, and there's likely more work that could be done than what our capacity is. Yet we want to ensure that what's making its way through is the most important work. So to engage in conversations in this matter of, this is the difference I believe it's going to make for the organization, these are the concerns that I have, this is what I think can move it forward, is a way for everybody to take part in that discussion. So in terms of prioritization, and as you looked at what your priorities are you, and you're reflecting on the goal of what it is that we were seeking to accomplish. So identifying that that information that will support effective prioritization and execution of the most important work, engaging in quality collaboration to effectively prioritize the work of your team, and to find greater meaning in your work. And you reflect on that, the goals. Are we accomplishing those goals? And what additional insights have emerged, and maybe what questions do you have? Take a moment to reflect on that, and you can answer it on page 8. And then I'm going to ask for some takeaways or answers to some of those questions of what insights have emerged. Are we hitting these goals? Are we recognizing its importance? How are we finding greater meaning in our work as a result of this? And what are some of those actions that are bubbling up where you know these are some steps that need to be taken, or steps that can be taken to immediately impact the organization? Just reflect on that for a moment, and then I'm going to spend our remaining minutes just discussing some of those things. Maybe another minute, and then I'll ask for some volunteers to share. All right. So broadly, what insights emerged as we made our way through this? How has this impacted the way you think about prioritization?
I think just realizing that I need to make this a continuous process. It's not, I prioritize once a quarter and then at the end of the quarter, I do it again. It's more of, it might need to be done on a bi-weekly basis, make sure that I'm continually aligned.
That's great, Jake. So as you went through this, did you recognize some areas where you were maybe focused because it's what was established at the beginning, but you recognize there's a need to adjust at this moment in time?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
I think taking a couple hours to reflect on what our team and company priorities helps pull me out of that day-to-day kind of focus that I've been on, and really just focus more on stuff that'll pay off tenfold as we move down the road.
Yeah. What kind of conversations or decisions are going to need to be made in order to be able to pull that off and execute on that?
Yeah, so right now SpotX is dealing with we're in vastly over capacity in every single department, just with the explosion of online e-commerce. And I think just instead of the focus on hammering through all the daily tasks, really just focus on, you know, helping the team as the tenured product specialist and sales team member, just help our team do those things better, more efficiently, saving me time in the long run.
Awesome. So are there going to be team members that are calling on you to tend to some of those very urgent matters that you're going to have to help paint this vision of why you're maybe deprioritizing that work?
Yeah, exactly. So just kind of establishing more of a line of communication through COVID. Working from home has made that a little bit more difficult, as we had kind of a lot more hands-on experience with the product. But just kind of rethinking how we get that knowledge kind of downloaded, and that'll help us kind of move forward. So new training programs, you know, around video conferencing and that kind of thing, just to kind of get that personal approach as opposed to just doing it over chat or email.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Nathan.
Yep.
I think for me, this has been a really good time to sit and reflect on, you know, how do we continue to effectively have the right type of prioritization? So within my current role, being able to understand what is the expectation. I think that starts that prioritization in your mind, is understanding what's the expectation, what's my timeline. And then you can adjust accordingly to know what are the main priorities that need to happen to meet those deadlines.
Awesome. So as you've identified some of those, did you have any concerns, you know, as you've maybe recognized, I need to prioritize this? Were any of those a concern to you?
Yeah, there was a couple different things I looked at from, you know, really digging into the processes that I talked about a little earlier in the session, with timelines with management, the leaders, to set those true expectations of when we need to be communicated with, or how we're communicating with them for those roles. But then I also alluded with our little breakout session that I'll be starting a new role with a new company in a couple weeks. So my priorities kind of shift at that point to really start to understand what is the expectation within the first 90 days of a new role, and how can I make an impact as quickly as possible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Megan.
Yeah.
What else?
I feel like just asking questions is key to alignment around, you know, what your purpose is as a team, what your organizational purpose is and everything. And then around the individual goals for what's the timeline, what's my objective here.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going into it and you have questions and you don't speak up to ask those questions, you're stepping off on a wrong foot. And that your goals should always align back to the mission of the organization and the team purpose, and with a combination of urgency and impact, you know, that can help you prioritize the work that you need to do.
Love that. And so for those who don't know, Alan just gone through a role change as well, where he's taken on a lot of additional reports. So even in terms of your self-understanding need, how are you seeking to support your team, and what is your team expecting, or how does your team see itself contributing to the larger picture? You've just gained a lot of reports. So in terms of looking at your priorities, has this helped you see how to maybe to approach some of those conversations that are going to be new or starting off for the first time?
This isn't the first time that I've seen this file or talked about this with you. And so this helped, I guess, just provide a stronger base for how to approach this. But yeah, the way that this works out for, you know, I had some team members of mine go through this already. And so, you know, if I have an understanding of what the organization's mission is and team's purpose is and everything, but what does each individual team member think? You know, are we aligned? And by having somebody go through this, and then I had team members send it back to me. And so it's, you know, what is the range of responses that I have? You know, are we close? What needs to be reviewed, and you know, have a conversation so we can have that alignment moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Alan.
Yeah.
How about as it relates to the goal, we have find greater meaning in the work. Does anyone feel like even when you think about the way to approach it, this impacted the way that you feel about your work? Finding greater meaning. Be able to make that connection. Are we hitting that goal? Or any of the other goals as well?
Well, I mean, at ClickStop, it's a lot about how we work. You know, the work that we do is very important to meet our goals. You know, but the greater meaning of our work is to create that great workplace culture, and how we go about that is the most important thing. You know, how people interact with each other, how people are engaged, you know, are they approaching it with curiosity and great communication and respect and everything there. So I think that's, I mean, how you approach prioritization with, you know, with confidence that you can speak up and ask questions and get to that alignment on the end goal, I think is some of the greater meaning.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, when it comes to owning our impact, right? And the feeling of I accomplished something today, I accomplished something that's meaningful for our organization. And it's meaningful to me because I took part in creating it and identifying it. What we're seeking to accomplish at every layer in the organization is for every individual to be actively engaged in what the organization is seeking to accomplish at the highest level, understanding in a more manageable way what their team is doing to accomplish it, and then looking through our role and responsibilities at what we have as an opportunity to affect it. And then we're beginning to just prioritize our work. And there's going to be things that happen and occur, the variables that were unanticipated or unpredicted. Just like COVID has presented a whole new set of circumstances for us to have to work through. Every one of us, in whatever organization is represented here, our organization has had to adjust to some degree, maybe drastically, maybe slightly, but to some degree there was an adjustment that needed to occur, which the ripple effect of that is priorities may be shifted. So how do we ensure that there is an anchoring in an efficient way, an agile enough way for us to identify those right priorities? And at all times engaging in that dialogue, repeated dialogue, repetition of dialogue, both internally, and then when we go to our manager, we're not asking our manager to feed us the information on what we should be prioritizing. It's bringing it into a conversation where we've already begun to think on it. It speeds up the conversation. This doesn't eliminate the need to ensure that there's alignment with a manager, but it helps us gain that alignment more quickly, where we're anchored in the same points of the conversation. What are we seeking to accomplish and why it matters? And we can express our concerns and what we feel may be at risk as we're bringing it in, and we can share that with the rest of our team as well when we're engaging collaboratively in what we're needing to accomplish. So as you've gone through this, hopefully there's some clear actions that you can take away that are going to immediately begin to impact your team. Ultimately, that's the measure of success of any of these workshops, is that it creates that action, because what we're looking for is results. And so what we're not after is just thinking through a philosophy or a concept to reach a point of agreement, but it's that commitment and aligned action. So where there's agreement, where there's understanding, now we align our action. So this tool is something that's intended to serve to that end, to help us to both produce, to create that commitment, and then to align our action so the execution grows. There may be other questions that you have related to engagement as well. You may have some additional when it comes to prioritization as well. I'll be hanging on for a few moments beyond the end of the workshop. So if you have some questions, I'll be around. Additionally, if you're looking for an opportunity where you're saying, I see opportunity in our organization to both, maybe it's this workshop or it's another tool or resource, or just wanting to talk about the effects of engagement or what you're seeing as an opportunity to increase the level of engagement in your organization, to create a thriving workplace culture, understanding that it leads to the right results for your organization in a sustainable way. Definitely reach out. I'd love to connect with you on how we can work together to reach that end. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.